You are tired, but not in the ordinary sense, not in the way a body begs for sleep after a long day's work. This fatigue runs deeper, beneath the muscles, beneath the bones, into the marrow of the soul. You could sleep 10 hours, rise with the sun, and still feel as though something inside you has not awakened. There's a weight pressing inward, a quiet heaviness that no amount of rest seems to lift. And perhaps the most bewildering part of it all is this: there appears to be no reason. The world around you sees nothing amiss. Your medical tests return normal. Your life, from the outside, looks relatively fine. Some even call you fortunate. So you begin to question yourself. Is it all in my head? Am I simply weak, ungrateful, unmotivated? But this is not weakness. This is not laziness. This is the soul speaking in a language the world has forgotten how to hear. A century ago, Carl Jung warned of this very condition, a spiritual weariness born not from labor, but from disconnection. A psychic fatigue that arises not when we do too much, but when we do too little of what truly matters to the self. You are not broken. You are not lost. You are simply distant from who you really are. This exhaustion is not a flaw. It is a signal, a message whispered from the unconscious that you have strayed from your essence, from the inner life that longs to be lived. You are tired because the persona, the mask you wear to function in the world, is starving your deeper nature, and no amount of sleep can revive a soul that has been silenced. If you've ever laid in bed and felt the ache of something missing, not in the body but in the being, know this: you are not alone. If you've ever whispered to yourself, "I'm so tired of being tired," that is not despair. That is your deeper self trying to reach you. This space, this moment, is an invitation to listen, because what you're feeling is not madness, it is a call, and in Jung's words, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. But not here. Here we speak the unspeakable. We name what others dismiss. We honor the truth you carry but have never been able to explain. To stay, breathe, subscribe if you must, but more importantly, lean in, because what follows is not simply an explanation of your exhaustion. It is a path through it, a return to the self you left behind, the one who has been waiting for you to come home. Carl Jung spoke of two distinct forms of tiredness. One is physical, the kind that comes from long hours, restless sleep, overstimulation, and the ordinary burdens of modern life. But the other is far more subtle and far more dangerous. It is the exhaustion of the soul. It is the quiet depletion that arises not from overexertion, but from living a life misaligned with your inner truth. And it is this second kind, the spiritual fatigue, that afflicts most people, though few have learned to name it. You are not tired because you've done too much. You are tired because you've done too little of what nourishes your essence. You are not weary from action. You are weary from inauthenticity, from wearing the mask too long, from performing an identity crafted to please others, to maintain the illusion of stability, to meet unspoken expectations that were never truly yours. You are tired because you've smiled when your spirit longed to rest, because you've said yes with your lips while your entire being whispered no, because you've held space for others while no one held space for you. This kind of tiredness seeps into the bones. It disguises itself as mood, as numbness, as a low hum of anxiety you can't quite explain. But at its core, it is the soul calling out for air, for truth, for a return to what is real. Each morning, you rise and step into a version of yourself designed to meet the world's approval. You smile, you function, you fulfill roles with precision, you are polite, productive, dependable. But in the quiet corners of your being, something begins to fade. The truest parts of you, the wild, unfiltered, sacred self, are suffocating beneath the persona. And the tragedy is that the world praises you for it. It rewards your self-erasure with applause, not realizing that your light is flickering behind the mask. Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But in a world that values appearances over authenticity, such becoming requires courage. The body, however, keeps the score. And when the soul is silenced for too long, the body begins to speak. Through fatigue, through burnout, through a tiredness that no amount of sleep can mend. This isn't just exhaustion. This is a reckoning, a signal, a sacred summons to come home to yourself before you vanish completely into the performance. And so the soul, silenced too long, begins to whisper, not in words, but in symptoms. A dull ache behind your eyes, a fatigue that no amount of sleep will cure, a sadness that seems to have no origin, a restlessness, a quiet dread, and a thought you barely dare to name. I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this. These are not signs of weakness. They are the psyche's early warning system. They are the subtle murmurs of an inner self that refuses to remain buried. Carl Jung taught that what we repress does not disappear. It descends into the unconscious and becomes the shadow. The shadow is not just composed of darkness or rage or pain. It is also formed of every truth you've denied, every dream you've deferred, every impulse you've muted to fit someone else's comfort. It is the unlived life, the pieces of you exiled not because they were wrong, but because they were inconvenient. And as the shadow grows heavy with the weight of your silenced authenticity, so too does your weariness deepen. You are not merely tired, you are soul-weary from the weight of self-abandonment. Tired from negotiating your truth every day, from apologizing for your needs, from nodding along when your spirit says no. You are exhausted because you've traded your voice for temporary peace and received only quiet despair in return. You are depleted not by effort, but by dissonance. You are not aligned. The self the world rewards is not the self your soul recognizes. And that inner conflict, the war between your essence and your performance, is the true source of your exhaustion. Jung understood this well. He wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And so it is. The fatigue you feel is not fate. It is feedback. It is your soul pressing against the walls of your false identity, asking to be let out. But this kind of burnout doesn't come all at once. It accumulates slowly, insidiously, through small betrayals, through the moments you smiled to avoid confrontation, through the nights you swallowed your sadness just to keep the peace. You chip away at your aliveness until one day you notice something subtle yet terrifying. You no longer laugh the same. You no longer cry with depth. Even joy feels distant. You are no longer living, you are functioning. And this is the moment of reckoning. The moment the psyche can no longer sustain the split. Not to punish you, but to invite you home. To call you back to a life that feels like your own. And when you finally collapse, when your body can no longer bear the burden of the false self, it is often met with shallow remedies. Take a nap, they say. Go on vacation. Buy something new. But as Carl Jung reminds us, your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. The fatigue you carry is not from doing too much, but from being too far removed from yourself. This tiredness is not a call for rest. It is a call for reclamation. It is your soul whispering, "Come back to me." You've lived so long in survival mode that the pulse of aliveness has become a distant memory. You've become proficient at performing, saying the right things, showing up where expected, wearing the mask that earns applause. But beneath it, you feel it, the hollow routines, the scripted conversations, the absence of sincerity in your own voice. You're present for everyone except the one person who needs you most, yourself. This is not living. It is a slow, spiritual erosion, a quiet death dressed in functionality. And that exhaustion that clings to you, it isn't just physical. It is the soul's sorrow, a sacred ache, a message written in muscle and mood. I miss you. It is the ache of disconnection, not just from your purpose, but from your presence. Jung understood this ache not as sadness in the ordinary sense, but as a rupture of inner wholeness. He believed that the root of much psychological suffering was not merely emotional disturbance, but a severing from the self. And this severance breeds a fatigue no coffee or retreat can mend. Because this is not about stimulation, it's about silence. Not about fixing your schedule, but facing your truth. Healing begins not with distraction, but with permission, with the audacity to say, I'm not okay, but I'm willing to stop pretending. When you meet yourself there, stripped of performance, something stirs in the darkness. You stop outsourcing your worth, you stop negotiating your aliveness, and you begin at last the sacred return, the journey home to the self. You've mastered the art of adaptation. At work, you are efficient, composed, capable. At home, you play the stable one. With friends, you entertain. With strangers, you're polished, pleasant. And online, you wear a persona so curated, even you aren't sure who's behind it. These roles were once protective, necessary armor forged in the fires of belonging and survival. But over time, these masks do not just hide you, they begin to replace you. And it is here, in this slow substitution of self, that the soul begins to fracture. Carl Jung named this the persona, the social mask we craft to function in the world, to be accepted, to be safe. It is the version of you that pleases, that smiles on cue, that conforms to the expectations of the collective. But the danger lies not in wearing the mask, but in forgetting you ever put it on. The deeper the investment in performance, the more the authentic self suffocates beneath it. And though the world may applaud your image, the body keeps the score. This is the kind of exhaustion that cannot be healed by rest or routine. Because what you lack is not energy, it's inner alignment. You reach for distractions, your phone, the glow of another episode, the endless scroll of curated lives. Because silence now feels dangerous. In that silence, you can hear the distance, the gulf between who you are and who you've pretended to be. You're not just tired, you're estranged from yourself. Jung warned that when the soul is ignored for too long, the shadow, those unlived truths, those buried instincts, does not remain quiet. It gathers force in the unconscious until it breaks through with volcanic intensity. Burnout, panic, rage, numbness, depression. These are not random malfunctions. They are the psyche's rebellion. You call it a breakdown, but it is in truth a breakthrough that waited too long to be heard. You are not fatigued because you are weak. You are tired because your soul is weary of performance. You've nodded through too many conversations, smiled through too much sorrow, and betrayed your inner knowing more times than you can count. And now your nervous system doesn't trust you. It no longer believes you'll protect the truth of who you are. That fatigue? It's not failure, it's a signal. A sacred summons back to yourself. Picture this. You carry a backpack that no one else can see. Each morning, someone places a small stone inside. Your boss's silent demands, your family's unspoken expectations, your partner's unresolved wounds, society's ideals of perfection, and, most of all, the weight of your own unexpressed truth. And you carry it, because you've always carried it, because you were praised for being strong, for being steady, until one day it isn't a boulder that breaks you, but a pebble, the final one, the smallest one, not because it was heavy, but because you never gave yourself permission to set the bag down. Carl Jung's vision of the human psyche was never confined to clinical theory. It was a map of the soul's suffering and longing. He taught that when we disconnect from our authentic self, we do not simply lose vitality, we lose meaning. You may still function, still succeed, still smile on cue, but underneath you begin to feel spectral, as though life is passing through you instead of being lived by you, a ghost of your own potential. The question Jung would ask is not, why are you so tired? But rather, when did you begin to disappear? Was it when you were told to be quiet instead of cry? When you earned love by being the responsible one? When someone shamed your tenderness and you learned to translate pain into silence? Somewhere along the way, you made a sacred trade, to survive, to belong, to be accepted. But what you surrendered in return was the essence of your truth. And now the soul grieves. This exhaustion is not weakness, It is mourning. Mourning the self that had to be exiled for you to be embraced. Mourning the boundaries you were never taught you had the right to hold. Mourning the aliveness you tucked away so the world could stay comfortable. And perhaps for the first time, you are safe enough, still enough, conscious enough to feel it. This is not collapse. It is emergence. The body remembers what the mind learned to suppress, and now, as the weight becomes unbearable, the psyche calls for reunion. You are not tired because you are broken. You are tired because you are returning, and that return begins not with action, but with grieving what you were forced to leave behind. But this moment, this ache in your bones, and this quiet collapse in your chest is not the end. It is the turning point. You do not have to stay imprisoned in the performance. You do not have to keep carrying the mask that once shielded you but now slowly suffocates your spirit. The roles you've played, the polished image you've perfected, the agreeable self you offered the world, they were never lies, but they were never the whole truth either. They served their time, protected your place in the world, bought you belonging in rooms that feared your wholeness. But now, they are slowly killing your soul. Carl Jung taught that healing does not begin when we fix ourselves, but when we meet ourselves. Not the persona, not the curated version of who you should be, but the real you. The one buried beneath layers of pleasing, proving, and pretending. The one who is raw, flawed, tender, unpredictable, and infinitely alive. You are not exhausted because you've done too much. You are exhausted because you've lived too long in exile from your own truth. And the toll is devastating. Joy becomes distant. Words feel hollow. Accomplishments lose their meaning. You stop dreaming. You stop hoping. You stop feeling. And worst of all, you begin to believe that this numbness is simply adulthood, simply reality. But it is not. This is not who you are. This is who you became to survive in a world that taught you your aliveness was too much. But now comes the sacred work of unbecoming, the unraveling of the false skin. You get to take off the armor. You get to stop, not because you are weak, but because you are waking up. You get to rest, not as retreat, but as resurrection. Rest not as laziness, but as a revolutionary act of returning to life. They called you lazy because they saw you withdrawing, skipping calls, dragging yourself through ordinary tasks. They labeled what they couldn't understand. They mistook your silence for apathy. But Jung would have seen something else entirely. He once wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. And you have been facing yours in quiet agony, not loudly, not dramatically, but consistently, alone. That is not laziness. That is survival. That is soul work in disguise. You are not falling apart. You are being pulled inward by something ancient, something sacred. And now, at this crossroads, you are being offered the most radical invitation of all, to stop pretending, to shed the weight, to come home to yourself, at last. You see, when one is severed from their essential being, when the soul is exiled from its rightful place, the body does not merely slow down, it begins to whisper in fatigue and then to scream in exhaustion. This tiredness is not failure, but a sacred signal of misalignment. The further you drift from your authentic self, the heavier the fabric of life begins to feel, not because life itself has grown more difficult, but because you no longer recognize your own reflection in it. You are tired, not from doing too much, but from living too long in contradiction. The mind urges, push through, while the soul pleads, please stop. You wear a smile like armor, you perform, you show up, but inside, something cries, this is not me. That silent war within you, that dissonance between the mask and the truth, it burns more energy than any task ever could. Carl Jung once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And he believed it was not trauma or stress that caused our deepest suffering, but the slow and unconscious departure from the center of who we are. That disconnection doesn't just wound, it drains. It becomes a fatigue that no stimulant, no vacation, no applause can resolve. It is the body's last alarm before transformation. When all other signals have been dismissed, when the soul has whispered and been ignored, tiredness becomes the final language. And that fatigue, that inability to fake aliveness anymore, is not a breakdown. It is the beginning of a sacred reunion. It is the soft collapse into your own truth. A return, not to normal, but to what is real. You were never made to spend your best hours appeasing expectations you never agreed to, smiling through soul-numbing routines, or recovering each night from the falseness you endured all day. That is not life. It is the slow erosion of the self. But here lies the miracle. Healing does not come when you strive to fix yourself, but when you stop abandoning yourself, when you stop reaching outward for permission and begin listening inward with reverence. And from that quiet return, something ancient and unshakable begins to rise. Not happiness, not yet, but wholeness. And wholeness is not fragile like joy. It is stable. It is rooted. It does not depend on applause. It simply is. So what now? You stop trying to return to who you were. That version of you, polite, performative, compliant, was the very reason you collapsed. You begin again, gently, intentionally. You start small, saying no without guilt, letting silence remain silence, resting without permission slips, creating space for joy, not as escape, but as essence. And as you rebuild, you begin to whisper to yourself, "This is me." Not the mask, not the brand, but the true, unpolished soul beneath it all, the one who was never lazy, just grieving, the one who was never broken, just disconnected. And Carl Jung said, your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens, and it is tiredness, honest, sacred, bone-deep tiredness, that brings you to that awakening. It breaks your momentum, it silences your distractions. It leads you to the mirror not to criticize, but to remember. What if you're not broken? What if you've just been lost in survival, carrying a life that was never yours? When you ask that, not from your intellect, but from your heart, something shifts. A door opens. Something within you whispers, "Welcome back." Because there is a kind of tiredness that no nap can cure. It is not born of effort, but of disconnection, from joy, from meaning, from self. And now, after years of giving, surviving, and smiling when you were starving for peace, there is nothing left to do but return, to stop performing, and to begin living again. Not as a polished version of yourself, but as your truest one. This self does not seek validation. It does not explain. It does not chase. It simply rests, breathes, and remembers. Because energy returns when self-abandonment ends, because rest is not indulgence, it is the first act of self-respect. Your exhaustion is not shameful, it is sacred testimony. It means you've carried too much, said yes too often, ignored too many inner alarms, and now your body is calling you home. Not forever, but long enough to rediscover what it means to be whole. Sometimes healing looks like fire, but often it looks like soft refusals. Sleeping early, saying no, letting go without fanfare. Jung didn't urge us to perfect ourselves. He urged us to meet ourselves, to stand face to face with the shadow, the tender, aching self who's been whispering all along, "Please come back." This is your moment, not to fight, not to fix, but to surrender, not to give up, but to rise. Rise through rest, rise through truth, rise through the remembrance that you are not a machine, not a mask, not a role. You are a soul, and that soul is not tired because it's weak. It's tired because it has waited long enough to be heard. Now let it speak. And if this spoke to the truth inside you, like it, share it, and remember, you are not alone. Someone else out there is collapsing under the weight of survival too quietly to be seen. but your awakening might just give them the permission to begin their own. If something within this message stirred you, if even a single word mirrored your inner experience, I invite you to let your voice be heard in the comments. Have you encountered that soul whose presence feels like home, or are you still walking the sacred path back to yourself? Your story, however unfinished, may become the lantern in someone else's darkness, the very sign they didn't know they were searching for. And if someone close to you is silently struggling with the illusion that love must hurt, that self-abandonment is the price of connection, or that they are unworthy of peace, share this video with them. Help me reach the ones who need to remember. Real love does not demand that we shrink. True connection does not ask for sacrifice of the soul. And the most vital union we will ever form is the one with our own inner truth. Before you go, I invite you to subscribe and activate the notification bell. Here, in this space, we journey beneath the surface of things, exploring the hidden architecture of the psyche, the whispers of the unconscious, and how every relationship is but a mirror reflecting our personal evolution. If there's a theme, a question, or a wound you would like us to explore in future videos, leave it below. This space breathes because of you. Your voice is not only welcome here, it is essential. Thank you for showing up, not just to this video, but to your inner work, to the sacred labor of remembering who you truly are. And always remember this: when the right person appears, your soul will know, not through fear, but through peace. But until that moment, let your most intimate relationship be the one you cultivate within. That is the foundation, that is the home. And from that wholeness, all things real are born. Until next time, I'll see you on the path.